This is what should be taught in our schools as the human life cycle. Now, the correct sex education, I've had people ask, there is a man and a woman, they come together in a relationship called marriage, which is a spiritual institution. And if they're blessed, they would get a child who is a boy is called a son. And if they are a girl, they're called a daughter. And then the man becomes a father and the woman becomes a mother. Those are titles. So that unit is what is then called the family. It is the many families that form the government. It is not the government that should tell families what to do. It is families that should tell the government what to do. That unit called the family, that is how sex education should be taught. When you say husband, when you say wife, those are sexual titles. When you say son and daughter, those are sexual titles. Sex education is not teaching children how to have sex. Sex education is to teach children how family is organized into government. Sorry, just one slide back. That should then be the correct definition of health. It should be the complete spiritual, physical, mental, and family well-being, and not the absence of disease or infirmity. So spiritual is missing from the WHO definition because it is godless. And family has been called society, which is amorphous and a big, large unit. We need to narrow that down to family. Now, on the LGBTQ agenda, just a few comments. Next slide. Is same-sex marriage possible? And I'd like to make sure, as we live here, we're very clear. Now, among our people, marriage is a spiritual union, and it is consummated through the first sexual intercourse among the couple. So any one of you here, look at your culture, look at your religion. Once the spiritual bringing together of the two has been completed, then sexual intercourse must happen and is celebrated because that is how the marriage is eventually consummated. Now, people of the same sex cannot engage in sexual intercourse, so their marriage is already null and void. Okay? Is already null and void. So people of the same sex cannot be married, and that they can call their union whatever they want to call it. But they should not abuse the term marriage. Let's go to the next slide. When it comes to homosexuality and transgenderism, again, it is something that we need to be very careful about. When you look at young people, I had a young man who is having challenges with same-sex attraction. He had been abused by his father as a young man. There are young ladies who want to be boys because they were abused and they thought that if they were boys, they would not be abused. And therefore, they want to become boys to save themselves from the pain of what they went through. So when we have same-sex attraction or children who are rejecting their biological sex, it is very important for us to know that they are survivors of a very traumatic experience.
Vous allez chuter, docteur? Il faut chuter. Vous allez chuter? Non, il peut continuer. D'accord.
So the children who are experiencing those attractions
okay, d'accord. Vous avez encore 10 minutes.
Are survivors of adverse childhood experiences, and it is an expression of a very serious mental health illness called post-traumatic stress disorders. And if you understand that, then you understand that these children need our love. They need our understanding. They need us to bring them to a place of understanding of where the trouble started from so that we can bring them to a point of healing. And it is extremely, extremely cruel to tell these children that they are normal and that they should actually live out their experience. And those are the kind of people we must deal with very severely. Anybody who teaches our children's sexual reproductive health and rights or comprehensive sexuality education should go to jail. Next slide. Next slide. And I would like to congratulate this august House on the fact that you passed your bill on the human sexuality rights and family values. People are calling it anti-homosexuality bill. They need to read and see that the title is different. The other thing that is important is if there is a challenge, I would be happy to work with this House. I'd be happy to work with His Excellency, John Mahama, to tidy up the bill so that it is not thrown out. It is very important that that bill sees the day of light. The question of safe and unsafe abortion, if you're a medical worker, you know that we are being told there is safe abortion killing mothers and we should replace it with safe abortion. Both of them aim to kill the child deliberately. Both of them are medically unethical, and none of them is acceptable. So one is done by people who are not trained or in a place that is bad. The other one is done by people who are trained in a good place. Both of them aim to kill the baby 100% of the time. So next slide. Next. Again. So this is a statement I'd like to make in this august House. There is no medical diagnosis. There is no medical diagnosis for which the treatment that would be prescribed would be the deliberate killing of a preborn child. And I would like to challenge any medical person who is here and who may be listening from whatever part of the world to challenge that statement. Let's go on. Now, as I'm coming to an end, the question is, are we going through a pandemic or are we going through genocide and racketeering to steal taxpayers' money? Next slide. We have what is called gain of function research, which some witches and wizards are actually taking natural appearing viruses and training them to become infective to human beings. And then they patent that virus. And then the virus is used to manufacture a vaccine. And then, surprisingly, there is an outbreak of a disease. And all our governments then must release taxpayers' money that was not meant for that work to run around going to take care of the pandemic. Now, this gentleman wrote an article. He's called Nicholas. He wrote an article that was very interesting. And in that article, he demonstrates that in January, Bill Gates, actually through this organization called CEPI, gave money for Moderna and Oxford University to develop a vaccine against the Ebola virus that is currently ravaging the Congo. Next slide. And he presents this as the patent for the virus. And this patent was actually filed in 2009 and published in 2012. The virus is owned. And now we have, we check that story about Moderna, it is here. Next slide. We also know that WHO amended its international health regulations to give itself more power during the next pandemic, and even came up with amendments to the pandemic agreement that were concluded late last year. Next slide. We also discovered that the Kenyan government has broken all the protocols of managing disease by agreeing to bring Americans who are infected into the country. It is unprecedented. The WHO is not saying anything about it. Our Ministry of Health is not saying anything about it. Next slide. Then on the 29th of last month, our president signed a bill that is called the National Disaster and Risk Management Bill. And it is actually fashioned to give power to the WHO pandemic treaty. Next slide. And now we have an outbreak of Ebola. Okay? Let's go to the next slide. So my recommendations to our esteemed guests: adopt the African Union Charter for the Protection of Family and Sovereignty and Religious and cultural values and domesticate it. Then modify just one area. There are special groups that are called single parents, families, and child-led families. It needs to be corrected because a family is not complete without the parents. So the special group should be absent spouse families and absent parent families. And then let the charter be the reference document. Next slide. Next slide. So each parliament should check who they are sending to negotiate. The directors for medical services must be held to account. The next slide. And then the legislators learn to look for the deception in those instruments. Next slide. And then check if you have that National Disaster and Risk Management Bill or Act and find out whether it's giving government too much power to overrule the people. And my last slide, the UN must remain advisory. Next, please. And then post-COVID-19 and the current Ebola crisis, both of them qualify for genocide. If the virus is owned and it is killing people, that is genocide and racketeering to steal from public coffers. They are both crimes against humanity. Africa must call out the Ebola crisis before it kills us and ask for a ban. We need to ban gain of function research, and this crisis needs to be investigated and some people brought to book. Next slide. This is where I want to end. This is a quote by St. Augustine. He who denies the existence of God has some reason for wishing that God does not exist. Thank you very much.
Si nous pouvons encore une fois applaudir. Merci beaucoup, docteur. Vous avez été vraiment à la hauteur. Je crois que la salle réagissait à chaque phrase. Et donc, nous disons sincèrement pour la matière reçue et surtout pour toutes les informations sanitaires. Nous allons très vite remettre aussi la parole, accorder la parole au deuxième présentateur. Si nous appelons Monsieur Om Ak, voilà, consul chrétien international. Vous avez la parole pour 10 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la modératrice. Distinguished speakers, members of parliament from Ghana and across Africa. It is a privilege to address this assembly on the topic of negotiating health sovereignty in global policy. As reflected in Article 7 of the draft African Charter, health sovereignty can be defined as the personal and national independence to define and apply the right to health. Since the COVID-19 pandemic in particular, maintaining this independence has grown more challenging as calls for an internationally centralized approach to interpreting and applying the right to health have become increasingly prominent. Two specific areas of health sovereignty warrant closer attention. First, soft law approaches to the content of the right to health have gained significant ground and are increasingly being presented as binding interpretations. Hard law, the law in the binding international conventions related to the right to health, are increasingly being ignored. On the issue of abortion, for example, both the WHO and various international human rights mechanisms have intensified their calls for universal access to sexual and reproductive health and rights without any limitations or gestational age limits. Second, the proposed pandemic agreement seeks to consolidate a centralized approach to addressing global health emergencies, one that risks overlooking the geographical, cultural, and religious dimensions that shape how the right to health is applied at the national level. When comparing the current Africa Group's negotiation priorities in the Pathogen Access and Benefit Sharing Annex to the Pandemic Agreement at the WHO. With the draft charter, 3 principles emerged that could strengthen health sovereignty in the outcome documents. The first is the principle of subsidiarity. Decisions must be made at the lowest appropriate level to ensure accountability and a right to health that aligns with each sovereign state's constitutional framework. This can be achieved by clearly defining the mandate of international health institutions as focused on providing guidance, support, and data, rather than setting normative standards. Time-bound interventions can further reinforce national health sovereignty. The second is the need for a renewed commitment to local capacity building. The success of the WHO, including its regional agencies, should not be measured by its growth as a centralized agency, but by its progressive redundancy as national capacities mature, including in the context of public health emergencies. Negotiating proportionate emergency policies requires accounting for the foundational determinants of health, such as hygiene, nutrition, and high-burden diseases. Only by doing so can we ensure that resources are not diverted towards expensive technological interventions at the expense of the broader health of African populations. The third is the continued integration of ethical principles in defining the right to health. Human dignity as the foundation of human rights must serve as a moral compass in determining the scope of the right to health. Strict conflict of interest rules are an important mechanism to uphold this standard. In summary, negotiating toward health sovereignty will advance an accountable and equitable right to health, one that fulfills the positive obligations that many respected constitutions have entrusted to their mandate holders. The shared flyer from the International Health Reform Project, an initiative developed in collaboration with African academics, provides an overview of key recommendations and pathways to national actions. Past successes or institutional dependencies should never become barriers to a critical and honest assessment of the legal or factual realities surrounding international health organizations' approaches. I will close with the words that the distinguished former president of Liberia, Her Excellency Ms. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, spoke last year in Accra during the Africa Health Sovereignty Summit. Africa's health future will not be given, it must be claimed. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Amelkak. Nous avons gagné quelques minutes. Et donc, si nous pouvons nous répéter un tout petit peu, le principe d'éthique, comme venait de dire notre dernier intervenant, fait directement effet sur la dignité humaine et ceci constitue notre morale. Au niveau de notre continent Afrique, la dignité humaine est prioritaire. Et si nous récupérons l'intervention du Dr Ngar, ici, la santé reproductive doit être retirée de notre langage. Et donc, c'est vraiment un langage animal et ceci n'est pas reconnu dans ce principe d'éthique que nous pouvons nous reconnaître comme Africains. Et dans les valeurs que nous voulons privilégier, il faudrait absolument que cela soit pour nous un principe à rétablir et à considérer. Alors nous disons sincèrement merci aux deux présentateurs, nos deux orateurs. Merci pour votre éminente intervention. Nous pouvons applaudir encore une fois pour notre orateur du jour, M. Hack. Merci beaucoup. Nous prenons notre dernier intervenant. Et ici, c'est l'honorable professeur. Nous applaudissons pendant qu'il est en train d'aller prendre la parole. Nous prenons la parole du dernier intervenant qui est le professeur honorable Titus Kofi Beyo. Vous avez la parole, membre du Parlement. À vous la parole.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Let me stand on the established protocols because of time. And to just say that today we gather at a critical juncture in the history of our continent and the world. The events of recent years have underscored the vital importance of health sovereignty, a concept that lies in the heart of our collective well-being and national resilience. Africa continues to navigate the complexities of global health governance. It is imperative that we assert our rights to shape our own health policies, systems, and outcomes. Our approach must be grounded not only in self-determination, but also in enduring values that define our societies. So, what is health sovereignty? Health sovereignty is the right and responsibility of a nation to prioritize and manage the health of its people without undue external influence. For African countries, this means having the authority to set our own agenda, allocate resources, and make decisions that reflect our unique context and needs. In a nutshell, it comes with rights and responsibilities. We are often quick to seek for the rights, but we leave out the responsibilities. The responsibilities are that we must be willing to fund our own health care. We must take pride that we are able to take care of our own pregnant women, take care of our children, take care of the most vulnerable in our society without depending on donor support. Because he who pays the piper determines the tune. And we must do this in a value-based perspective. And what are the African values on which we must negotiate our sovereignty on? Our vision for health sovereignty should be deeply rooted in these African values. And one that we all associate with is the principle of Ubuntu. I am because we are. This should remind us that the health of the individual is inseparable from the health of the community. As Africans, we cherish solidarity, mutual respect, and collective responsibility. Our traditions emphasize the dignity of every person, the importance of consultation, and the pursuit of harmony. These values are not just cultural touchstones. They are practical guides for building inclusive, responsive, and resilient health systems. What challenges do we face in the global space? Despite progress that have been made, global health governance often reflects imbalances of power and resources. Decision-making bodies are sometimes dominated by actors with interests that do not align with our realities. Too often, African nations are recipients rather than shapers of the health agenda. External funding, while essential, can come with conditions that limit our autonomy as African nations. Recently, we have all been posed with the American First strategy in global health financing, where all of us were supposed to have bilateral negotiations with the US government. How did we respond? In one country that we visited, the health technocrats told us that it looks like their parliamentarians and legislators and the government were reading the figures and not the words. The statements that were put before them, they were looking at the figures and not the words. And so we signed without looking at its impact on our own sovereignty. what does health data mean to each of our our respective countries? So what strategies should we use in negotiations? To address these challenges, we must engage in the negotiations from the position of strength, of unity, and principle. Let us draw our traditions of consensus building and inclusive dialogue in these negotiations. We should present a united front, speaking with one voice on issues that affect our continent. Collaborations among African nations with other regions will amplify our influence. We must advocate for fair representation on the global health institutions and insist on transparency and accountability in all partnerships. By rooting our strategies in African values of solidarity, respect, and communal responsibility, we can negotiate outcomes that honor our sovereignty and serve our people. Honorable members, your leadership is essential. I urge us to champion policies that reinforce our health sovereignty and reflect our values. Demand that international agreements respect our autonomy. Invest in our local expertise, research, and innovation. Build coalitions with like-minded nations to reform global health governance structure. Let's advocate for equitable allocation of resources and inclusion of African perspective at every level of decision-making. We are the guardians of our people's health and their hope for a just and healthy future. In conclusion, let us reaffirm our commitment to health sovereignty as a foundation for healthier nations and a more just Africa. Guided by our values, united in purpose, and steadfast in negotiations, we can secure a future where every African enjoys the highest attainable standards of health. Let us act with wisdom, with courage, with solidarity to shape the global health governance in a way that truly serves our continent. And I'll end with a Ghana example. Our president, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, convened the Accra African Health Sovereignty Summit on the 5th of August last year. The outcome of that summit was the Accra Reset, and that we should shift from dependency to self-determined healthcare. And we are pushing this hardly. Let us all see what we can do as individual countries and be proud to say that we are taking care of our own people and not dependent on someone to come to us and throw something to us and in return take all your data and determine what should be health priority for your nation. Let us stand up. Thank you very much.
Ah oui, merci beaucoup encore une fois. Si nous pouvons applaudir pour l'honorable professeur Titus. Vos applaudissements, s'il vous plaît. Et donc ici, nous disons que le débat sur la souveraineté sanitaire ne vise donc pas à rejeter la coopération internationale. Il s'agit plutôt de garantir que l'Afrique participe à la gouvernance mondiale de la santé à partir d'une position